They didn't fire me in private. No quiet meeting, no closed-door conversation. Instead, they chose to make a spectacle out of me right there in front of hundreds of employees gathered under the bright lights of a San Francisco convention hall. The CEO walked onto the stage with that polished smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. His voice boomed over the microphone as he spoke about efficiency and streamlining operations. And then, without a pause, he called my name. My heart pounded as every head in the room turned toward me. He said the words like they were nothing. "Evelyn Shaw, your role is no longer needed." The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for him, the golden boy executive putting on a show. I stood there, frozen, boxed in by polite claps and fake smiles, while years of my loyalty were erased in a single sentence. The worst part wasn't losing my job. It was the humiliation, the way they stripped away my dignity in public, as if I were disposable, as if my work had never mattered. I felt the burn of shame in my chest, but beneath it, something colder stirred. They thought they had ended my story, but in truth, they had just lit the fuse. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, where are you watching from? And let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible at work, like everything you gave could be discarded in a heartbeat? Leave a comment if this hits close to home. Your words might be the reminder someone else needs today. For years, I wasn't the one on stage. I wasn't the face in glossy press releases or the voice quoted in big magazine interviews. I was the quiet presence in the back corner of every project, the one who made sure the messy, complicated parts of government contracts actually worked. While others smiled for cameras, I wrote the clauses, checked the boxes, and fixed the mistakes that could have cost millions. My title was simple enough, something that sounded plain to most people. But the truth is, my work carried weight. I was the one who kept the doors open, the one who made sure we never failed compliance checks. And yet, because I didn't brag about it, because I didn't play politics, they treated me like background noise. I still remember how some of my colleagues would pat me on the shoulder with that patronizing tone, saying things like, "You're the best at cleaning up our messes," as if I were some invisible janitor for their errors. Others would roll their eyes when I flagged risks, calling me too cautious. What they never understood was that my caution was the reason their deals even went through. And management, they saw me as expendable, just another line on the payroll, someone they thought they could cut without consequence. They wanted the spotlight, the quick wins, the flashy numbers that looked good on quarterly reports. The foundation holding it all together, that was just me, and they never even looked down to notice it. But here's the thing about being invisible. People forget that even a shadow can touch everything. When you're the one behind the curtain, you know exactly where the strings are tied and how easily they can unravel. As I packed up my desk that day, sliding old notebooks and contracts into a cardboard box, I couldn't help but think, if they really believed I was replaceable, what would happen when the invisible hands stopped holding everything together? The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic thud, sealing me inside a box of humming lights and mirrored walls. For the first time all day, no one was watching me. No fake applause, no forced smiles. Just silence and the faint vibration of machinery pulling me down to the lobby. I stood there, clutching that cardboard box filled with the remains of 15 years. Old notebooks, a coffee mug with a fading logo, a few pens. To anyone else, it looked like the belongings of someone finished. But what they didn't realize was that I still carried something far heavier: access. I slipped the box onto the floor, pulled out my phone, and opened the secure compliance portal. My hands didn't shake. In fact, they were steadier than ever. This was muscle memory. The login screen blinked to life, asking for my ID, my password, then a second factor. I pressed my thumb to the sensor. A soft beep confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't revoked my credentials yet. A thought crossed my mind. Should I wait? Should I let them feel safe first? But then I remembered the way the CEO smirked when he said my name, the way the crowd clapped as if I were a problem being erased. No, this wasn't the time to wait. My finger tapped through the menus until I reached the form. Form 1923B, Stop Work Order. My eyes lingered on the button. One tap, and the gears that kept their shiny empire moving would grind to a halt. Not forever, not yet, but enough to remind them that I was not so easily deleted. The elevator hummed as it slowed. I could hear the faint ding of the ground floor approaching. And just before the doors opened, my thumb pressed down. The screen flashed red. A warning in bold letters lit up, "Violation logged. Penalty initiated. $150,000 per hour." I picked up my box, the phone still glowing in my hand, and stepped out into the crowded lobby. People passed by without a glance, unaware that a countdown had just begun above their heads. The morning after the first cracks began to show. Not loud, not explosive, just small ripples that spread faster than anyone expected. It started with a Slack message that popped up in one of the company's main channels. "Can anyone access the federal compliance dashboard? I'm getting locked out." Within minutes, replies stacked up. "Same here. Systems error. Merlin servers down." From the outside, it probably looked like a technical hiccup. These things happen all the time in big organizations. But I knew better. This wasn't a glitch. This was the first tremor. I was sitting in a corner cafe overlooking the bay, a latte warming my hands, when my phone buzzed with notifications. Screenshots of error messages, panicked questions, even a meme or two as employees tried to laugh off the confusion. But underneath the jokes, I could feel the fear building. People were starting to realize this wasn't a quick fix. By 9:15 a.m., a manager sent out a mass email. "We're experiencing temporary issues with our compliance systems. Please remain patient." But patience doesn't last long in the corporate world, especially when contracts are on the line. At 9:32, another message leaked through. "Oversight agency flagged us as non-compliant." That's when the tone shifted from annoyance to panic. I imagined the scene back at headquarters, conference rooms filling with red-faced executives, voices raised, fingers pointing, everyone scrambling for answers. And yet, there I was, calm and invisible, watching it all unfold from miles away. By 10:07, one of my old teammates messaged me directly. "Evelyn, do you still have access? Can you check something for us?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the app. No reply, just silence. Because the truth was, they already had their answer, and this was only the beginning. The cracks were spreading, and soon enough, the foundation they thought was unshakable would start to crumble. By late morning, the denial had set in. I could almost picture the boardroom as if I were sitting in the corner seat watching it unfold. Executives pacing with their coffee cups, IT managers swearing it was just a server sync issue, and the legal team insisting it had to be a clerical error. No one wanted to admit the obvious. The chat logs told the story better than any camera could. Messages flying. Restart the system. Force an override. Escalate to engineering. Every suggestion more desperate than the last. But each attempt came back with the same message, stamped in red: unauthorized ROR replacement, logged and rejected. I imagined the silence that must have followed that alert. It was the kind of silence you hear when people realize they're not in control, but still can't bring themselves to say it out loud. Someone from legal sent out a carefully worded memo to the staff. "Operations are proceeding as planned. Please refrain from speculation." The kind of line meant to calm, but really it only stoked more whispers. Employees weren't stupid. They knew something bigger was happening, something that couldn't be fixed with a restart. And yet, leadership kept the mask on. They scheduled more meetings. They reassured shareholders. They even tried to convince themselves this was nothing more than a temporary blip. Denial can be a powerful drug inside a corporate tower. It buys time until time itself becomes the enemy. My phone lit up again with a familiar name. A teammate I used to trust. Evelyn, please, do you know what's going on? Can you help us? For a second, I felt a twinge, the pull of old loyalty. But then I remembered the applause, the smirks, the way they erased me without a second thought. I set the phone down without replying, because soon their denial would run out of air. And when it did, the spiral wouldn't stop at confusion. It would collapse into something much worse. By the next day, the tremors inside the company had spilled outward, and the world beyond those glass walls began to feel them. What started as nervous whispers in Slack channels was now bleeding into government inboxes, client hotlines, and even the press. It began with a single email from the oversight agency. Cold, direct, no room for interpretation. Vendor is currently non-compliant. Immediate review required. That one line was enough to freeze every payment tied to the company's federal contracts. Billions of dollars put on hold with the click of a mouse. The CFO's office sent out a panicked memo, complete with a countdown clock estimating financial losses per hour. The number was staggering, $150,000 every 60 minutes. I pictured the executives staring at that clock, watching it tick like a bomb they couldn't defuse. Clients weren't far behind. Messages flooded in. Why are our deliverables delayed? When will systems be restored? Some were professional, some were furious, but all of them demanded answers. The more leadership scrambled to issue polished responses, the more obvious it became that they had no control over the situation. Meanwhile, the press caught the scent. A small industry blog published a short piece, Major Compliance Provider Facing Technical Turmoil. By noon, the story had been picked up by larger outlets. Reporters camped outside the office building, snapping photos of every nervous employee walking in and out. And through it all, I stayed silent. Sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, I scrolled through the chaos on my phone. Each notification felt like a distant echo of a storm I had already walked away from. They didn't know where to look, who to blame, or how to stop the bleeding. The shockwaves were no longer just internal tremors. They were waves crashing against the walls, threatening to bring the entire structure down. And the question hanging in the air was simple. When the outside world demands answers, who inside will be forced to admit the truth? Inside the company, the pressure cooker finally cracked open, not with a bang, but with sighs, whispers, and the kind of nervous laughter people use when they know the ship is sinking. The once busy Slack channels turned into rumor mills. One employee dropped a meme of the Titanic hitting an iceberg. Another replied with a gif of people running for lifeboats. At first, it was dark humor, a way to cope. But as hours turned into days, the jokes stopped being funny. They became reminders of just how dire things had become. I heard from an old friend still working there. She confessed over text, nobody believes leadership anymore. Half the team's updating their resumes. The other half is just waiting to see if paychecks bounce. Town hall meetings were scheduled, but they only made things worse. Executives repeated the same hollow lines. We're addressing the issue. Please stay focused. But employees could see through the cracks. They knew contracts were frozen, clients were furious, and the company was bleeding money every single hour. The hallways, once buzzing with chatter and movement, had turned heavy. People avoided eye contact. Some sat at their desks, scrolling job boards, instead of answering tickets. A few openly whispered about jumping ship to competitors. Even managers who usually played the role of cheerleaders looked worn down. One reportedly muttered under his breath during a meeting, "This is unsustainable." That kind of honesty spreads fast in a workplace, and once morale crumbles, no memo or pep talk can glue it back together. Meanwhile, I was watching it all unfold quietly, almost like an out-of-body experience. The same colleagues who once dismissed me as replaceable were now adrift in a storm I had seen coming long before them. The collapse wasn't complete yet, but the foundation was gone. And soon the people inside would have to face a truth even harsher than low morale. The very laws and contracts they relied on were working against them. When technical fixes failed and morale collapsed, leadership finally turned where they should have started, to the legal team. But what they found there was even worse than server errors or frozen dashboards. The lawyers dug into the company charter and the government contracts line by line, desperate for a loophole. Hours turned into all-night marathons of highlighters, binders, and exhausted paralegals. And in the middle of it, one clause kept appearing like a red flag, waving in the storm: the responsible officer role. That role wasn't just a formality. By law, it had to be filled by someone certified, recognized, and most importantly, willing. No proxy signatures, no forced replacements, no "we'll just assign someone else." The contract made it brutally clear: unless the current officer gave unambiguous consent, the seat stayed locked. Reports started leaking. I saw a screenshot of an internal memo, probably not meant to leave the boardroom. It read, "Resolution hinges on securing Evelyn Shaw's cooperation. Legal containment is limited. Consent must be voluntary." For the first time, they weren't just facing technical chaos. They were staring down the weight of federal law. And law doesn't bend to press releases or executive egos. That's when the tone of their outreach changed. Gone were the angry phone calls and accusations. Suddenly, my inbox filled with carefully worded invitations. "We'd like to discuss an advisory opportunity. Your expertise is critical at this time." They even dangled consulting contracts worth 3 times my old salary. But every offer came with the same desperate undertone: "Please sign the paper, give us consent, unlock the system." And I knew something they didn't want to admit out loud. Without me, that lock would hold for months. The contracts would remain frozen, the penalties would stack, and their empire would keep bleeding. The trap had closed, and they were the ones caught inside it. The only question left was how much would they be willing to pay to get out? When the invitation came, it wasn't a polite request. It was a summons, a meeting scheduled in their New York headquarters, the kind with mandatory attendance stamped on every calendar. For years, I had sat quietly in those boardrooms, overlooked and ignored. But this time, I was walking in on my own terms. The atmosphere hit me before I even sat down. The room smelled of burnt coffee and panic. Executives lined the table, faces pale, ties loosened. The CEO, the same man who had smiled while firing me in front of the entire company, was already red-faced, slamming his palm on the table. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "We can't be held hostage by one person." The general counsel cleared his throat and pushed a thick binder toward him. "With respect, sir, the contracts say otherwise. No signature, no compliance. No compliance, no contracts." Silence. The kind that makes you hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded calmly, letting them stew in their own chaos. Inside my heart was steady, not racing, not trembling, just steady. Because I knew the power balance in this room had shifted, and everyone else was finally realizing it. The CEO turned his glare toward me. "Evelyn, be reasonable. You're damaging the company you worked so hard to build." For a moment, I almost laughed. The company I worked so hard to build, the same one that erased me without hesitation. Instead, I kept my tone measured, almost quiet. I didn't damage anything. I simply followed the rules you never bothered to read. A few heads turned away to hide smirks. Others scribbled notes nervously. The weight of the truth was pressing down on all of them. And as I glanced around that boardroom at the very people who had once dismissed me as invisible, I knew it was time to lay out my terms. The boardroom was tense enough to snap in half. Papers lay scattered across the table, executives whispering in corners, the CEO glaring at me like I was the enemy of the state. But I wasn't the one who had put the company in this position. They had done that to themselves. I let the silence sit for a beat longer. long enough for every person in that room to feel it press against their chest. Then I leaned forward and spoke slowly, clearly, so no one could mistake my words. "There are 3 conditions," I said. Pens stopped scratching. Heads turned. The CEO muttered, "Conditions? This isn't a negotiation." But the general counsel cut him off. Let her finish. I raised one finger. First, a payout. 7 figures. Tax protected. Non-negotiable. You wanted me gone. You tried to erase me. Now you'll pay for the years you treated me like I was disposable. A second finger. Second, all of my benefits restored. Health, retirement, stock. Every last one. You cut me out of the picture as if I never mattered, but I won't walk away stripped of what I earned. A third finger. And finally, I paused, letting the weight hang in the air. The CEO resigns. Immediately, within 24 hours. No golden parachute. No quiet consulting title. Just gone. The room erupted in whispers, half shock, half disbelief. Someone at the far end stammered, "That's impossible." Another voice hissed, "She can't be serious." But I was. Dead serious. The CEO slammed his fist down. "You're insane. You'll burn the company to the ground." I met his stare and let a small, calm smile curve across my face. "No, I'm offering you a chance to save it. Without my consent, Clause 10B locks everything for 6 more months. You know exactly what that means." Silence again, heavy, suffocating. And as their eyes darted between one another, I knew the weight of my demands had landed. The question wasn't whether they could accept them. It was how long it would take before they realized they had no other choice. The CEO's face was crimson, veins standing out on his temples as he shouted across the table. "You think you can walk in here and dictate terms? This is my company." But the room told a different story. No one spoke up to back him. The directors avoided his gaze, some pretending to flip through papers, others staring down at their phones as if the glowing screens could shield them from the truth. The general counsel cleared his throat. "Respectfully, sir, she's right. Clause 10B gives her absolute authority in this matter. Without Evelyn's signature, the contracts remain locked. And every hour we delay, the financial penalties grow." The CFO, usually his most loyal ally, finally broke. "We're hemorrhaging money. Stock is collapsing. Clients are threatening to walk. If we don't act now, there won't be a company left for anyone to run." The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there watching the balance of power shift right in front of me like a chessboard, where the king suddenly realizes he's cornered. The CEO looked around, searching for an ally, but all he found were averted eyes. One board member finally spoke, voice low but firm. "It's over. Step down." He slammed his fist once more, but it landed softer this time, more desperation than rage. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but the words had no weight anymore. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "No, the only regret here is yours. You thought I was invisible. You thought you could erase me without consequence. Now you get to live with the fallout of your own arrogance." The chair of the board gave a final nod. "Effective immediately. Draft the resignation letter." And just like that, the man who had once humiliated me in front of the entire company sat powerless in his own kingdom, stripped of the authority he clung to so tightly. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. His downfall was already complete. But as I gathered my papers and prepared to leave the room, one final decision still hung in the air. What would I do with the leverage I still held in my hands? When I walked out of that boardroom, the air felt different, lighter. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't carrying the weight of being overlooked or dismissed. Behind me, the CEO, who once humiliated me, was forced into silence. His resignation wasn't just ink on paper. It was the proof that arrogance always has a cost. The company moved on quickly. They had no choice. Contracts had to be renegotiated, clients needed reassurance, and new leadership scrambled to rebuild trust. But the shadow of that day would follow them for a long time. People whispered about it in hushed tones, calling it the moment everything changed. And me, I didn't return as their employee. I didn't want their titles or their corner office. I chose something better. I stepped into the world as a consultant, working on my terms with people who valued what I brought to the table. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was seen and I was heard. Looking back, it still amazes me how quickly power can shift. One moment, you're disposable. The next, you're holding the only key that matters. It made me realize that strength doesn't always come from being loud or from chasing recognition. Sometimes it comes from patience, from knowing your worth even when others don't, and from being ready when the moment arrives to stand your ground. The lesson I carried away is simple. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The people who stay late, who double-check the details, who don't seek the spotlight, they are often the ones holding everything together. And when they walk away, the whole structure shakes. So let me ask you this. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have made them face the consequences?